think, Marge. All I need is a title.
The votes are in, the results have been tallied, and in some cases, recounted, and now it's on to the 2020 elections. However, before attention turns in that direction, we have a few things to review in the wake of the 2018 midterms. Now first, we must point out that this video has been delayed in large part because 2 states were still engaged in recounts, with Rick Scott filing lawsuits against recount efforts in the Democrat strongholds of Broward and Palm Beach counties. Scott contended that these found votes were illegal and possibly faked. Given that this is southern Florida we're talking about, and given the state's colorful past regarding electoral laws, we think Scott had a point. We will also echo the criticism leveled at Rick Scott, who has been the state's governor for a long time now. He's known that this problem exists, but he has done little to nothing to fix it. Let's hope that the incoming governor will be a bit more proactive, as the state's continued electoral debacles have made it a laughingstock around the rest of the nation. In Arizona, there were apparently some early votes that were not counted, and this threw the U.S. Senate race there into question. Originally, Martha McSally led the race by a small margin, but the majority of the uncounted votes were in Maricopa and Pima counties, the state's 2 largest counties, where the cities of Phoenix and Tucson are located. Kristen Sinema led in these 2 counties, and by last count, led in the race by just under 10,000 votes. Pinal County is located just southeast of Phoenix and has a population of roughly 375,000 people. So McSally could have possibly picked up enough votes to overcome this latest deficit. At least Arizona's excuse is that they are counting the early votes, unlike Florida where they may have found some ballots in a school and also in a rent-a-car. However, the fix was in the form of the emergency voting stations opened up illegally and only known to the Democrats. Before anything could really be done about this, Martha McSally had dropped out of the race and conceded to her opponent, wishing her the best. I, for one, think that whoever is responsible for the opening of these secret polling locations should be subject to the full measure of the applicable laws. In Georgia, Democrat gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams has conceded defeat in the race against GOP candidate Brian Kemp, after a series of recounts and the possibility of a December runoff election threatened to drag that state into the same electoral muck as their neighbor to the south. While some Democrat lawmakers are touting their new power in the U.S. House, some Democrat-leaning YouTube channels are trying to dodge just how wrong they were about the race in the U.S. Senate. In the last video, I spotlighted Let's Talk Elections, a Dem-leaning website that, through most of the election, thought that the night might be won by the GOP, but only because Mike Pence, as vice president, gets to break any ties, as the channel went for weeks, if not months, saying that the Senate would be divided 50-50 after the midterms. In his latest and possibly final video on the overall outcome of the 2018 elections, he states that he was only wrong about 2 states, Indiana and Florida. However, for most of the time, he also had Missouri and Tennessee both going to the Dems, despite the information stating that Phil Bredesen was not as popular in Tennessee as polls might indicate, and despite the well-known fact that Claire McCaskill only retained her seat because the GOP ran an idiot candidate who served to cover up just how unpopular she was in the state. These were not hard calls to make, and Politics City made them right off the bat. We were also not hesitant to say where we thought the Democrats might win, such as in the states of New Jersey and Montana. In New Jersey, the Democrats put up a horrid candidate in the form of Bob Menendez, who is a corrupt politician, but the people of New Jersey like their Democrats in much the same way that Texans like Ted Cruz, who, by the way, beat out Beto O'Rourke to retain his seat. In Montana, name recognition and the fact that the Democrat candidate wields quite a bit of influence due to seniority meant that John Tester beat out challenger Matt Rosendale. This was despite several visits to the state by President Donald Trump, and these visits made the race quite close. Unlike some YouTube channels, I am also not hesitant to say when we got some of these races wrong. I felt that Nevada GOP incumbent Dean Heller might just pull out a slight win, but this did not happen. I also believed that up until nearly the end of the race, I was calling Indiana for Joe Donnelly. And by the rubric I set up for Let's Talk Politics, it would only be fair if I counted that against myself. Due to the shenanigans in Arizona, I won't count that state for or against anyone. I called the state for McSally, Let's Talk Politics called it for Cinema, and it's only with McSally's recent concession that Cinema won the seat. I also won't hold the race in Florida against anybody because, well, it's Florida. So, moving on to bigger and better topics, what does the electoral results of 2018 mean? Well, first, welcome to divided government. The populace of the United States generally likes it when things get done in government, until they don't. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected president and he was given a Democrat-controlled Congress. The result was Obamacare, which was passed in March of 2010. The backlash against this takeover of the U.S. healthcare system caused the Dems to lose 63 seats in the U.S. House and 6 seats in the U.S. Senate. By contrast, the GOP lost about 40 seats in the U.S. House, and they have gained at least 3 seats in the U.S. Senate. Another more recent example would be the passage of the 2017 tax reform that had the effect of driving down payroll taxes, putting that money back into the pockets of the people, who would then spend that money into the economy, which has been doing very well since the passage of the reform. This led to the results of the 2018 elections, which dampened the so-called blue wave. However, I would have to note that in the 2018 midterms, pretty much no one was talking about the economy. Even President Trump shrugged off the suggestion that he should talk about the economy, saying that he was more interested in solving problems. For the GOP, the main issue was immigration and the threat of hundreds, if not thousands, of people flooding across the border in an illegal immigrant invasion. For the Democrats, the main issues were either health care or carping about how mean President Trump was this week. When we have anything less than full control of the government by one of the two political parties, things tend to slow to a crawl in Washington. Basically, the government tries very hard to pass funding bills to keep the government operating, and that's about it. President Trump can still enact some limited policies affecting the federal government through the use of executive orders, and he has had some great success at removing the Obama-era executive orders and rescinding some government regulations, which had the effect of jump-starting the economy in 2017. Nowadays, however, that well may be running a bit dry. There are some indications that the president and the Dems might be able to work together to focus on some shared interests like infrastructure projects and things like that. However, if the House Democrats start to bog Congress down with tedious and useless investigations or start to move toward impeaching the president, I think the president and the U.S. Senate will nuke the House from orbit just to be sure and wait until 2020 for the next chance to regain the majority. Meanwhile, the Senate will be busy confirming lower-level judges on the federal bench, and if the Supreme Court has another opening, which might be a possibility, then President Trump might have the unprecedented opportunity to pick a third U.S. Supreme Court nominee in his first term. So get well soon, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Well, that's a wrap on the 2018 midterm elections with a special focus on the U.S. Senate. I hope you've enjoyed this video series, and I look forward to doing it again in a couple of years.